Hey everybody, this is Professor Davis, and I just wanted to do a really quick introductory video. First, I wanted to say welcome to the class. I'm excited to have all you guys in Watercolor 220. We're going to have a good time. It's going to be a lot of fun. Now, normally I go over this kind of material like the first night, but we only have 8 total classes because it's an evening night class, first part of the semester, which I think you guys probably knew when you signed up. But what I want to go ahead and do is kind of talk about what I would talk about with supplies and get you started on going out and finding those things. As I said in my email and in the syllabus, you'll find you can find most of these items at Michael's, Hobby Lobby. Let's see what else. Dick Blick has stuff, and even Walmart probably has a few of watercolor sets and things like that. I know they have brushes, and I think they probably have watercolor sets. So I picked Michael's to just go over some of this, but it really doesn't matter where you go. And I don't care about the brand either. That's not important. I'm not going to make you get a specific brand of watercolor paint or brush or anything like that. But Michael's is in Canton. I don't know if you've been to that particular spot. It's by Publix. I get art supplies there, and it's the closest thing to an art supply store that we have in the area. Hobby Lobby is also fairly nearby at this point. I think they built one up on exit 19 that you can check out, and they have a decent art supply section. Okay, so I want to start with the paints themselves. Now, this is really important. This is what watercolor paints look like if you've never done that before. So I'm zooming in here, and actually that kind of helps. See how the tubes are a little bit on the smallish side? That's usually the key to the tubes being watercolor paint and not acrylic or oil paint, which tend to have much larger tubes. So you can see that they're listed at 4.8 fluid ounces. That's perfect. You don't have to get that exact number. I don't care about that. The only thing I really care about is that the paints are labeled watercolor, okay? Make sure you actually see that word watercolor on there because it can be confusing. A lot of stores in the paint section of the arts and crafts section will have so many different types of paints you can get. And I've had students accidentally buy oil paints before, so you don't want to do that. So it should say watercolor, just like this set right here, watercolor clearly labeled. If it doesn't say watercolor, I would hold off on that, okay, or find it in that particular section. And then you should be good. The sets aren't too expensive. This is actually a very inexpensive set, but it usually tends to be a little bit more than this. But you can probably find a set of colors, and that's what I recommend doing. You can buy the tubes individually, but you're going to find that's a little bit more expensive way to do it. What you really need is like a rainbow of color, just to give you different options for the class. So if you have the primary colors and the secondary colors, and you have like a yellow ochre that we have here, or a brown color or yellow that you can mix in, that's going to be great. It may have white. White actually is not a very useful color in watercolor. You're going to use black watercolor a lot more than that. So that's the main thing. Look for a set. I want to just go back to what I was looking at for a second ago. Avoid this type of watercolor paint, okay? This is like what kindergartners use. I highly, highly, highly recommend you don't go the route that everybody's used when they're kids, where you wet the little dab and it activates the paint. Don't do that. That's not going to work. What you need is the tube set, okay? As I showed you earlier. And you got to be careful. Like this little set right here, it's watercolor, but it's listed metallic. You definitely don't want metallic watercolor paint. I've actually bought metallic paint before on accident, so it can be kind of annoying. So you want to avoid that. Okay, let's look for brushes real fast, and I'll try to move pretty quickly here. I'm just going to search in watercolor brushes. I also really recommend you go for sets with watercolor brushes. I'm not seeing what I'm looking for with that, so let's try a different search thing here. Okay, this is going to be a better set. So at Michael's or Walmart or any place like that, you can find what's called brush sets, and they're going to be like this, okay? They're going to be labeled synthetic, which just means they're plastic based and not like expensive horsehair brushes. They tend to be $6 to $12, something like that. The brush size, I mean, the type of brush can look, the color of the brush tip doesn't matter. That confuses some people. It can be like an imitation hair brush. I personally like the white synthetic brush tip. I think they last longer and they don't fall out. So you can get a view of that here. And, just get a variety of brush tip, like sizes and shapes. So if you can get some with angles on them, or real small if you want to do like line work, or a brush set that has like a bigger tip on the end. Like the more variety of brushes that you have, the better it's going to help you out when you do your watercolor painting. And you can kind of get an idea here. Here's another look at that. But I'm not going to tell you like one specific set you need to get, but I would just recommend use this as a guide. And let's see if there's any other ones. Okay, also let me emphasize, it doesn't have to say watercolor on the brushes. So earlier I said that the tubes need to be clearly listed watercolor. That's not the case with the brush. The brush themselves can be, they can actually be used for acrylic paint as well. I use the same brush for different types. I'm trying to see if they give us any more recommendations, but I think this is all I'm seeing that's going to work. In here in the store, they may have more options for you. But yeah, it doesn't need to be labeled specifically watercolor, as long as it is, make sure it's not a house paint brush. You don't want that. You want something that's actually like a brush that could be meant and intended for painting on canvas or painting on paper, which is what we're going to do. Okay. Last, let's go look at watercolor paper. This is one of those things that also you want to be real careful about what you look at and what you get. So I recommend not getting like a really small watercolor pad. What I mean by that is like a notebook size would be too small. Okay, 8.5 by 11, 8 by 11 or something like that. That's going to be too small. So I recommend get a watercolor pad that is a little bit on the larger side. And so this would probably be, or one of these two things right here would be great. Canson brand is fine. I don't care about the brand. But see, this one right here is 18 by 11. If I zoom in, 18 by 11 inches. It's got 30 sheets of paper. And, you can't tell from obviously looking at the screen, but that's a pretty good size pad of watercolor paper. If it's in the 18 by 12 range, that is going to be great. You can see it gives me smaller options over here. It's going to be okay if you want to go smaller on the size. So 11 by 15, that's going to be okay. I really do want you to avoid like 7 by 10 though. That would be too small. 12 by 18 is okay if that's all that you can find, but that's a little bit on the smaller side too. The reason I'm talking about the size of the paper is just because I want you to be able to paint larger, and we're going to do some like more in-depth paintings that can take 2 or 3 hours to complete. And if you have a bigger piece of paper, it's actually easier to work than having to do real small painting and cram all the detail in. So if I set up a still life, you want to have a lot of room on the paper to work. So that's a good brand. I'm not at all picky about brands, but I'll just kind of off the cuff mention this is a good brand as well, Strathmore. The paper could be different types of paper. I'm not going to get into the hot and cold press and all that stuff. It's too much. You don't need that information. Again, we have different size options here. If at all possible, get the 18 by 24. You can see that the size jumps up. I mean, the price jumps up a little bit. Okay, so that's $30. I know that's a lot when you're buying paper, but also keep in mind I don't have a textbook for this class, so there's no book that I'm going to require you to buy that would cost a lot of money. Most likely the watercolor paper will be the more expensive item that you get for the class, for the whole class. So go for that. If that's just not an option for you, Something a little bit smaller like the 11 by 15 or something in that range would be okay as well. Okay, don't worry or obsess too much about the size of the paper. Like I said, just please go bigger than 8 by 10 if you can possibly do that. Okay, so that's the main things that you're going to want to need for Wednesday night. If you can get those things, the brushes, the paper, and the paint. Okay, a couple other things I'm not going to look up because they're self-explanatory, but if you could have like a big cup that you could use for water while you're painting, you're going to clean your brushes out. Like the big cups you get at like Chick-fil-A or Subway, those work really great. That's what I use. You may want to go ahead and get like a fishing tackle box or like a shoe box or something just to keep all your stuff with you. I actually go to the fishing section at like Walmart or Target or whatever, Home Depot, and I'll use those fishing tackle boxes for my art supplies. So they'll have my brushes, my erasers, pencils, all that stuff that's in the tackle box. Real easy to carry around. Like I said, the shoebox works great. I'm not picky. I don't really care. It's just because I'm assuming a lot of you guys may be taking these supplies home with you or leaving them in your car or whatever. And, carrying them around is going to be a lot easier. We're going to be working out in the main hall, and there will be different classes that come through there during the day when we're not there. So you don't want to leave any of your art supplies out. You want to be able to either keep them in a locker or in your car or wherever like that. Okay. So I know that's a real kind of rushed, quick thing, but I don't want to take too much of your time up. If you have any questions, feel free to email me at jbd1@reinhard.edu. I also use the email davisclass@gmail.com. That's DAVIS, my last name, and then class@gmail.com. Looking forward to seeing you guys on the first class, and we're going to have a really nice semester. Thank you.